are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai, and after some heavy news, we want to bring you a different kind of voice. John Noltner is an internationally renowned, award-winning peace photographer. He sold his home to travel the country and the globe for his long-term project, A Peace of Mind, trying to find common ground in the most divided corners of American life. He's been to the border. He was at the Supreme Court the day the Roe v. Wade decision came down, and he's documented communities after natural disasters. John, welcome to A More Perfect Union.
Hey, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me, Dr. Quartelai.
It's great to have you here. John, I got to start here. You've made a career, really your life's work out of putting a camera and a microphone in front of people who fundamentally disagree with each other. Talk to us about, the origin story. When did you decide to start doing that? And when did you know that you're actually pretty good at it?
I'm still figuring out that second part, but I started this project. I spent my career as a freelance photographer shooting for national magazines and Fortune 500 companies. Back around 2008, 2009, the recession hit, and I found myself with some free time. And along the way, as I was shooting assignment work, I came to realize that it wasn't just my job to make beautiful photos, but it was my job to find beauty in unexpected places. That people actually hired me to see good where others might struggle to recognize it. And also along the way, I saw beauty and wisdom in all of the people who I encountered, whether they were ranchers or artists or musicians or parents, whatever it is. And I wanted to find a way to celebrate that. So in an increasingly divided world, which of course has not gotten better in the last 20 years, I wondered if there was something I could do with my photography and storytelling to remember what connects us. So it started with a really simple premise, just to sit with people from all different backgrounds and ask them the question, what does peace mean to you? How do you work towards it in your life? What are some of the obstacles you encounter along the way? And I wasn't particularly interested in the rainbows and daisies version of peace. I was particularly interested in those moments of tension, those places of tension and the places where we really struggle, and seeing if there was a way that we could find common ground and move forward in that sort of space.
That sounds really inspiring, but John, the people want to know, what made you decide that was worth selling your house for? I mean, did you really have to sell your house to do it?
Hey, this was my wife's idea. She's a smart person. It did not take me long to say yes, but here's what happened. So over a dozen years, I'd been working on this project. It continued to grow. I had 5 traveling exhibits. I had 3 books that we had produced of these stories, looking at the beauty and wisdom of people all around us. I was doing a lot of public programming. I was bringing these exhibits to campuses. I was leading workshops, and all of that stopped with the pandemic. And for a little while, we thought the project might go away. This was supported by my assignment work. It was slowly being supported by the public programming, but it was really just one guy's artist project. When the pandemic happened, all of that revenue went away. So I thought the project might too, but I had some friends, some people who had supported the project for a long time who said, why don't you form a nonprofit? Why don't you form a 501c3? There are people who would like to see you succeed. You're not really giving them a way to help you out. And so we founded a nonprofit. We had donors who stepped up, who thought that this work was important. And my wife said, if you can't do programming, can't you at least do new interviews? And so we could afford for her to quit her job and for us to pay for our own health insurance, but not also maintain a mortgage. So our kids were grown. There was sort of a pause in our life. We were trying to figure out what was new, and it seemed like a great opportunity to try something new. Both of our kids in their 20s at the time would tell you that this didn't seem strange at all to them, that their parents would do this sort of thing.
That's
interesting. It was kind of a natural outgrowth of the way we lived our lives.
Yeah. John, take us to the border. What did you see at the border that the news cameras and reporters usually miss?
Well, so I'll frame it in a timeline. So this is January of 2021, the beginning of January 2021. And so it's the change of the administration from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. We actually found ourselves at the site near Nogales, Arizona, where construction on the wall was halted when Biden changed the policy on the day that construction halted. So we found ourselves in some pretty unique places. But what I do, so we spent about 6 weeks down along the border. And again, we wanted to go to a lot of our tension points in the country, but we wanted to seek out the people who were looking for creative solutions, the folks who believed that something better was possible. And so when I do that, I definitely want to talk to asylum seekers and activists, but I also want to talk to Border Patrol agents and ranchers in the area and get this really broad range of experience, because for me, and in the work that I do, no one of us holds the entire truth, right? Each of us holds a little thread of the truth based on what our life experience is, what we've encountered along the way. And what's interesting to me is when you start weaving those threads together and you take a story from this person and another story from that person, it starts weaving into this beautiful fabric that looks a little bit more like peace. So when I go to a place like that, coming from out of town, I don't know who to talk to. You can't just roll into a town and say, oh, come here, I want to sit down for 3 hours and do an interview. It doesn't really work that way. And so I will try to have an advocate or an ally in a community who understands what we're trying to do and who has deep relationships in that community. And we'll work together and they'll help plug me into people, at least to make that first week of interviews make sense. Mm-hmm. And then everybody I talk to, as I start settling into a place, I say, well, who else should I talk to? Who else has an interesting story? Who else has a unique perspective? And my job is to stay out of the way, reduce my filter as much as possible, and listen to voices that often aren't heard as loudly as they should be in our world.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of voices that are often not heard as they should be, you were outside the Supreme Court of the United States the day the Dobbs decision came down. What did common ground even look like in that moment when people were devastated, standing next to people who were celebrating? I think I remember being in Washington, D.C. the day the Dobbs decision came down, and to say that there was a chill in the air was putting it lightly.
Yeah. Yeah. We had been staying just down the road from the Supreme Court that whole week, and we knew that this ruling was coming. I had spent time interviewing people who were deeply involved in women's access to health care and deeply invested in the outcome, which had even been leaked. And we sort of had a little heads up as to what this ruling was going to be. We didn't know exactly what day it was going to drop, but we happened to be photographing a portrait of somebody else that morning, and it looked like tensions were building. It looked like, there were Capitol Police who were in between the pro and the anti groups there. What was particularly interesting to me is about 15 minutes before they made the announcement, the Capitol Police left the site. They moved to the outsides of the crowd when they made the public announcement, which I didn't understand much, but a friend of mine who works in law enforcement helped me understand that maybe it's easier to do crowd control from the outside of a crowd. It didn't necessarily make sense to me. But in a case like that, I'm not there to necessarily get the stories. I'm there to bear witness at that moment. And then I operate a little bit in the quieter spaces when we're actually building our content. And we use that as an opportunity to start finding new people to interview, to start building this body of work that is really tied to a moment, but is timeless in another sense.
John, when you were documenting a community after a disaster, talk to us about what's the difference between grief that divides people and grief that unites them.
That's an interesting question. We've been in a number of places, and of course, I live in Minneapolis, and so not a a weather-related natural disaster per se, but when George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, that was just 11.6 miles north of my house. And so we spent a lot of time there gathering stories and listening to try to create a body of work that didn't say who was right and who was wrong, but listened to the heart of what was going on in a community. And what I find interesting about the work that I do is in those moments of grief, in those moments of struggle, people are open to human connections. People are looking for ways to connect. And when we can sit down and we can have an honest conversation with people, and when people feel like they're being heard, people will share some really powerful things. And so I've found that in those really raw human moments of grief, there are some truths to be heard.
Is there a story that comes to mind, or a portrait from this project that changed your mind about something?
That changed my mind about something. I would say more opened my eyes about things. You know, I'm the poster child of privilege, right? I'm a college educated white guy from middle America that lives in the suburbs. But my question is, what do I do with that privilege? And I very often find myself in places where I don't belong, and I haven't learned. I don't have the lived experience of being in that place. But what I continue to find, nobody owes me an education. But again, when you enter into a conversation with honest and authentic human curiosity and a willingness to learn, people will share some really powerful things. And I continue to learn what I don't know. And I continue to sort of revel in the grace and kindness of people from all different walks of life.
When we come forward, Black and brown folks, folks of different generations are absolutely exhausted by the news cycle that we walk through even just today. When we come forward, I want to get your thoughts on one practical thing that they can do to find peace of mind for themselves. We are talking, of course, to John Noltner. He is behind the project of Peace of Mind, and it is capturing people's hearts and minds. And more with him when we come forward. You're listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. You're listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai Corte, and really enjoying this conversation with a real life peace photographer and creator of A Piece of My Mind. He is doing the work on the front lines to try and find common ground in some of the most divided corners in American life. It feels like a palate cleanser. The work that you do feels like a palate cleanser, especially to somebody like me who is, self-admitted news junkie. Do you feel that way? Do you feel like this work has been a palate cleanser for you? Somebody who, is a big or has been a big consumer of the news headlines?
Yeah. My training was in journalism, and I am a self-proclaimed news junkie as well. But you made reference to it before the break. The news cycle is heavy, right? There's a burden to it, and we're all hit with it 24/7. And for me, I find that challenging. It becomes frustrating. It becomes demoralizing. It feels hopeless sometimes. But what gives me that hope again is when I'm out on the street talking to people, when I'm finding folks who are working to create positive change, when I am in proximity to these issues. Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative talks about being in proximity and how important it is to get close to the issues and the people who are impacted by them. And that's what we try to do with A Piece of My Mind. And when I can turn off the television, when I can get in the street and get close to those issues, that's what starts to give me hope again. It's those one-on-one relationships and those close personal connections, even in the midst of really impossible odds, where I find hope, because people are taking those difficult moments and doing amazing things with them. So yeah, palate cleanser. Absolutely.
That's right. That's right. Yay for the palate cleansers. Let me just ask you: is there one practical thing that folks can do to find a piece of their mind? I mean, particularly Black and brown folks. When we are watching these headlines on our news feeds and on the TV and in the newspapers, we see a lot of really horrible things that are happening. Um, Sometimes indiscriminately to folks in our communities. What's one thing you would offer?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to be able to solve the problems of the world, but I can tell you what works for me. And again, I'm in Minneapolis, and we've had another tough year with Operation Metro Surge. A lot of the people who I know and love have been impacted. What a piece of my mind did was go out into the community, and we did 200 portraits of people. We partnered with organizations that we have relationships with and photographed people, and we dropped the words "I'm human" on all of these portraits, and then we projected them on the exteriors of buildings in downtown Minneapolis at night as a way to say to the community, I see you, I hear you, and you matter. And I guess if I was going to have one bit of advice, and I'm talking to myself as much as I'm talking to anybody else, is to show up for one another, make eye contact, let people know that they're seen and heard and valued. I think that the problems of the world feel bigger than any solution I bring to the table. But what I can do is that the people I'm in proximity with, the people I'm face to face with, be present for them, show up for them in whatever way is helpful. And yeah, just keep showing up.
Yeah, yeah, John. Before the break, we were talking about whether common ground is a luxury, and I just want to go deeper on that with you. Again, you've photographed people across just about every dividing line in this country: race, politics, religion, geography. And I've got to ask you, is there a through line from where you sit? Because something almost everybody, regardless of where they land politically, actually agree on. Um, is that there is some common something out there. It has become more obscure by the vitriol that we're seeing in our politics today. But talk to us about what you see.
Honestly, the through line that I see is that there's pain everywhere, and it looks different in different communities. And being able to compete and say this pain is worse than another pain um, doesn't seem to move us toward the goal. That refusing to acknowledge somebody else's pain moves us further from the goal. And I think this is a thing I'm working through on my own as I look at this 20 years of work that I've been doing. But there's a consistency in human suffering. And the question is, what do we do for that? What do we do with that? Is there a way? Well, there is definitely a way that we can leverage that to political advantage, and people do that regularly, but there's also a way that we can move towards healing. And I think if we can shift our perspective to, instead of exploiting pain, instead of ignoring or telling people they shouldn't feel this way or they shouldn't feel that way, if we're to invest that sort of energy into moving towards healing in one fashion or another, I think we'd all be served better. I don't know how we find the political will to do that, because the political payoff for scapegoating and marginalizing and diminishing people is so high.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be embraced by the system. But we need to find a way individually, if nothing else, to move past that and look for hope, healing, and human connection if we're ever going to be able to move towards something that's less divided.
John, in addition to serving as a host of this show, I also serve as a White House correspondent for KBLA and the Tavis Smiley Show. And so, I consume a lot of news every day, particularly related to the White House, and not just the Trump White House. I covered the Biden White House as well. But you've done this work across multiple presidential administrations. Talk to us about any observations that you've made around how the texture of division itself has changed over the years.
Yeah, I started this project 20 years ago because I was frustrated with the quality of our national dialogue and how everything asks us to look at what can separate us. And clearly, in the last 2 decades, it has not gotten better. I mean, it's on steroids, and it is. I feel like we are automatically leaning politically and socially leaning into contention and conflict, and we've forgotten uh, our way for looking for compassion and connection. And I think at a certain point we've gotten so enmeshed in the trenches and in the process of vilification and marginalization and polarization, um, that until we can step aside from it, we don't remember what else exists out there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I definitely hear that loud and clear. My sense is that we um we've gotten so caught up in the game of politics, right?
Mm.
It's not politics as a means towards making people's lives better. It's who's up, who's down, right? It's whose foot's on whose neck. It's who's dominating who's owning the libs. It's that kind of rhetoric. It's that kind of energy that's out there. For communities like ours in places like LA, where our station is based, for Black and brown communities, for folks who lean progressive, what would you say is the biggest misconception that people have about folks on the other side?
Hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think as I interview people, I regularly get faced with some of my own preconceptions, right? I walk into every interview thinking, oh, I sort of know where this is going to go. Or I hear a little bit about that person and I extrapolate and I fill in the blanks to match the label that's in my head for who that person is. And so my advice is, again, the same advice I give to myself: to listen deeply, to challenge my own expectations, and to continue to show up at the table. I mean, I think I would categorize myself as firmly in that progressive end of the camp. Um, but that being said, when I encounter conservative folks, not as a block, a voting block, not as a label, not as a constituency, but as an individual, that I'm perpetually faced with nuance and complexity that I did not expect to be there. And I think anytime we can challenge ourselves to be present enough and open enough to see some of that nuance and complexity, that moves us towards bridging. It moves us toward connection, and it moves us away from the polarization that I think, like you say, is so pervasive in everything.
And I've got to ask you the same question in reverse. What's a misconception that folks in our community might have about folks in, say, rural Iowa, that are dealing with, there's a whole cancer crisis that's happening there that we talked about in our first hour of the show. Certainly, I remember when Barack Obama, when he won the Iowa caucus. This was back in 2008 when he was running for president. And, that sent shockwaves across the country. It sent shockwaves across the country, across the political spectrum, because, a Black man, named Barack Hussein Obama just won the Iowa caucus. And so a lot of folks thought, well, quite frankly, if white folks in Iowa, including rural Iowa, could get behind a Barack Hussein Obama, then this guy may actually be able to capture enough votes to become president. That seemed to be a moment in time that may have challenged the assumptions that so many of us might have held at that particular time. But talk to us about the misconceptions that folks in our community might have about people in rural America.
I come at this from a pretty interesting perspective because my wife and I live in Minneapolis, but also we have a Christmas tree farm in Western Wisconsin that we operate. And so we have a foot in the city and we have a foot in the rural settings. And in both circumstances, when we're in the rural spaces, the folks there have misconceptions about the city. It's unsafe. It's all burning. You wouldn't want to go anywhere. You don't know any of your neighbors. When I'm in the city, folks have misconceptions about the rural folks, that they're all racist or they're uneducated or or that they're all conservative. And again, we consistently bump into examples of where that's not true, and that's where I get hope. When we can look outside of those bifurcated arguments and say that, oh, all rural folks are this way, all Southern people are that way, all urban folks are the other way. I could come up with a lot of specific examples, but they all relate back to me because I find myself making some of the same errors. I was working with a rural coalition of folks in Montana just a month ago, who the community was struggling with mental health issues. They were having an uptick in youth suicides. They were trying to figure out how to manage that, how to offer a little bit of help and move towards a little bit of healing. And when I was in that very rural space, what I saw was people who care for one another. People who don't necessarily have all the answers, but they want to help. Same as when Metro Surge was in Minneapolis, people who didn't have all of the answers, but they showed up because they wanted to help one another. I guess I'm coming back to your through line. And that's the through line that continues to give me hope.
John, in our remaining minute with you, I want us to wrap up our time with you on something forward looking. If you could put one more portrait, one more voice into this project before you're done, who or what would it be?
If I could add one more person, is that the question?
Yeah, one more portrait, one more voice. This is your big moment, John. No pressure.
Don't blow it, John.
Michelle Obama may be listening.
I know. I would love to interview Michelle or Barack or anybody, but honestly, I am always interested in the person who's not in the headlines. I'm always interested in the person that nobody else has heard of. I'm always interested in the person who will tell me that they don't have a very interesting story to tell, because I know if I scratch a little bit below the surface, I'm going to find something interesting. And so, Dr. Quartelai, I am going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to tell you that always my favorite interview is the last one that I just did, and the next one I'm going to do. And part of the joy of the project is the mystery of not quite knowing who that is yet.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Our thanks to John Noltner. Thank you so much for your work and witness, and for the reminder that we're still capable of listening to each other. Find this project, A Peace of Mind, wherever you get your books and things. Appreciate you, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
You're listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580, The Quiet Part Out Loud, when we come forward.